Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, Castle in the Sky. The list of Miyazaki films that have influenced the hearts and minds of many is long, though his work at Studio Ghibli is something you likely already know, and not the focus of this video. While Ghibli is very dear to Miyazaki's heart, he's spoken of it as simply a studio, a tool to make films he finds creatively fulfilling, a tool that will, like all things, eventually erode, cease to exist. Morality, purpose, humanism, innovation. These ideas dance around the director's head, fuel his stories, and have made his art what it is today. More interesting than his projects is the man himself, his philosophies in life, and how he arrived at the values he holds. From interviews he's done and stories he's created, I've been able to create a small window to peek through and understand just a fraction of the man that is Hayao Miyazaki. 1941. 4 years before the Americans would flatten two of Japan's largest cities, Hayao was born to this world in what is modern-day Bunkyo Ward of Tokyo. By this time, Hayao's father, Katsuji, had already been dishonorably discharged from serving in the Japanese Imperial Army after expressing his desire not to fight, having a wife and child waiting for him back home. Within Japanese culture, the greatest virtue one can have is loyalty. For most, especially during this time, loyalty meant devoting your life and death to the emperor and all of Japan. But for Katsuji, loyalty meant being there to care for his children and wife. Regardless of his reasons, he was treated as a deserter to his empire and lectured for his cowardice by his commander. Yet regardless, he was able to return to his family. Together alongside his brother, Katsuji would manufacture planes for the Imperial Army as part of their company's work, a process that would fascinate Hayao through adolescence. Watching his father work on these complex machines that could take flight to the sky like birds, free and limitless in the sky, it was something that would stick with him into his creative life. But Tokyo area wasn't a lasting home in his early days. With the Americans drawing nearer to the empire's mainland, bombings became more frequent. His family was constantly forced to relocate farther and farther north as fiber bombings left portions of the mainland in a constant hellfire. And when the flames would finally calm on their old home, there would be nothing left behind. Seeing war, more specifically the aftermath of the violence it brings, leaves scars on a child's memory. It's not correct to say Hayao outright blames the United States for all that happened. Japan is at fault for many atrocities as well, and the rejection to fight for something he didn't believe in by his father, and his mother's constant questioning of power structures in the state of Japan made clear this family was not blind by any sense of nationalism. They saw the world and the humans that inhabit it as they are, being capable of both love and destruction. For people raised in a society that preaches the value of conformity and social harmony, this family sought resilience to hardship and forging a path for oneself. Ideals that would be needed in the new world of post-war Japan when the atom bombs dropped in August of 1945. "210,000 Japanese lost their lives. Not just soldiers and officials that wanted to continue the battle, but people, citizens, mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. Sure, there were military bases near the cities, but the majority of lives taken by weapons now deemed a war crime to be used were common people." Hayao visited the rubble that was Hiroshima during the period of restoration, as the Japan population sought to rebuild after the emperor became nothing more than a figure piece, and the government, with the help of the United States, was remodeled into something similar to their own. There were some that objected to the westernification of their nation, while others welcomed this rebuilding, hoping for a new power structure, less overbearing and power-hungry. It was a strange time, one that led many to adopt pacifist views in aversion to war. Hayao was among them. The torment fixated on the faces of survivors, the fear and anxiety with the loss of their homes, their places of business, their families. Seeing such things at such a young age, how could he not reject the very idea of war? Time went on, and in the new state of Japan, Hayao began attending school, first as an evacuee in the northern Tochigi prefecture, and eventually, as Tokyo recovered enough to once again take in students, the family moved back near their original home. While it seemed as if the family was recovering well from their hardship during wartime, it would become clear to Hayao, life doesn't stop throwing you curveballs. He would become diagnosed with digestive issues, likely stemming from the mental and physical toll of stress when faced with the fallout of war. He was told he would likely not live past 20, death becoming an overbearing shadow, an idea he was forced to consider. It's not easy to grasp with your mortality, and it's something many of us begin to consider as we get older. Yet here, a young Hayao is already forced to weigh his time on Earth, the weight only becoming heavier with the sickness of his mother. From 1947 to 55, Dola would suffer spinal tuberculosis, prompting Hayao and his siblings to care for her along with household duties as her father continued his work in aerospace engineering. Though this was a difficult time, Hayao would remember his mother not for her sickness, but for her strength and resilience when faced with difficulties. She constantly pushed Hayao to question authority, look objectively at both the world order and their nation's budding government. Yet still, even in her rejection and open criticism of systems and people, she taught Hayao compassion and empathy, to understand others, even if you disagree with their values or actions. Strong yet caring, that was the type of woman she was. Before she would pass, she told her son to pursue his passions and dreams and live life in a way you won't regret. Hayao often reflected on those words. They pushed him to perfect his art, to become a better person, and look at the world around him, not just at the bleakness and the bad, but the hope that's found in the good. Art had been a passion of Hayao's from the early years of elementary, often drawing ships, tanks, airplanes, and the sort, sticking with these man-made machines, incapable of really getting the human form right. Yet it wasn't until 1958, the year of his high school graduation, that his deep love for the world of animation would be awakened. Hakujaden, a film adaptation of the Chinese folktale, Legend of the White Serpent. A simple tale of a boy and girl meeting, with conflict keeping them apart, and sacrifice needed to stay together. A love story, one that deeply touched Hayao, and inspired him to set down a path, creating things that, quote, yearn desperately to affirm the world, rather than negate it. It's no secret that this channel oftentimes explores worlds of despair, ones that have faced great suffering and pain. But I've always looked at these worlds not under the nihilistic lens, but in a hope that no matter the darkness you may find yourself entrapped by, there's always hope to persevere. Hayao, despite the suffering that surrounded his early life, chose to find the beauty in it. Through this movie, a story so simple yet loving, he learned that animation had the ability to bring this sense of inspiration and raw emotional wonder to an audience. Could he create stories that moved others to the level this film has moved him? Could he create stories that both spoke of the world and its problems, while also creating a fantastical land that instilled hope? Hope that human spirit will persevere over hardship, come together and bring out the good in one another. Reflecting on his mother's words, to pursue a life that he would not regret, he had to give it a shot. Following graduation, Hayao set his sights on college, majoring in political economy as a way to expand his understanding of the world and his nation's political structure. While he spent most of his time perfecting his craft, drawing in any freedom available, he made it a priority to go out into the world and experience it as a way of gathering inspiration. He stands by the best way to create good stories is by carefully examining the world and people of all their little details. In 1960, he would watch as a bystander as Japan had one of their largest protests of the modern era. The people opposing the US's indefinite military presence in their nation after a series of incidental violence between citizens and soldiers. And with the heightening tensions of the Cold War, there was a worry Japan would be dragged into an armed conflict without their consent, with no way to defend themselves, having been deprived of a standing military since the end of World War II. The politics of this period in history is much too lengthy and complicated to go into detail about here, but what's important about this event, in Hayao's presence as a bystander, is his constant interest in the changing nature of the world they live in. Seeing such a pivotal time in Japan's history, the conflicting direction different groups wanted to take their nation challenged how he saw things, forced him to understand opposition, the pressure to resort to violence, the desperation to be heard by an acting body of power by the people. He would take these jumbling moral thoughts and plug them into his works, maybe as a therapeutic way of finding his own sense of understanding. As college graduation finally arrived, Hayao would join the very same studio that created the film that set him down this passion to animate. Hakujaden's studio was none other than the infamous Toei. His time at this studio and what he walked away from the company learning was very reflective of his mother's teachings. Toei was a stepping stone, allowing him to enter into the world of animation, but the studio was oftentimes restrictive and lacking in creative adventures. He spoke out against this, becoming highly involved in the studio's labor union, where he would spark a friendship with Isao Takahata, the vice chairman of the group. Together they were able to create a few more opportunities for them as creators in the company. Yet still, Hayao was faced with distress, oftentimes stuck doing in-between art frames. He contemplated quitting the animation life altogether, dissatisfied to what it amounted to thus far, But once again, in his time of need for inspiration, he found himself in the theater, watching a showing of The Snow Queen, giving him the motivation to continue forward. Life's payoffs don't come at you instantaneously. This often is better understood by Eastern cultures, a hell of a lot more than in Western. The constant pursuit of instant gratification in the West can lead many to quit things early, or quit when things get hard, and results not immediately visible. Hayao, while not satisfied with his current state as an artist, continued forward, appreciated the opportunities he received, lessons he learned as he moved from studio to studio, collecting more experience and opportunity. For 22 years he did this, slowly gaining more creative freedom on his projects until the time came, and alongside his life friend Takahata, the studio we know as Ghibli was founded. They now have the freedom to create the worlds they always dreamed of, bring to life films large companies always saw as risks when pitched. Yet these same films they rejected captivated the masses worldwide, enthralling them into the unique worlds Miyazaki would create for each story he touched. The life experiences he collected over his 44 years thus far, the values and beliefs he's strengthened, the contradictions within them, the conflicting ideals of others, the ever-changing landscape of the world as we know it. These concepts would find themselves in each and every one of his films. 4 core ideals spring to mind when I think of Miyazaki. 4 beliefs that explain his outlook on humanity and hopes for its future, each carefully explored in his films. And that's exactly how we'll learn to understand the man, through the craft he worked so hard to create. Humans and nature have a complex relationship. On one hand, we cherish its beauty and freedom. It heals the spirit and eases the mind. Yet another part of us longs for the comfort and safety that comes from society and its concrete creations. Industry provides us with things unkept nature cannot. These two opposites collide in a constant battle for control, destroying one another if left to their own devices. Leaving behind a concrete building allows nature to once again claim the structure, but to build said structure in the first place means to destroy the once flourishing nature. There is a balance to be had, such as Hayao's goal of emphasizing, yet not just in the way you are thinking. The Industrial Revolution had environmental consequences we often talk about, but what finds itself oftentimes ignored is the effect the industry had on our spirits. You may have felt it before, the soul-crushing feeling that may slither into your mind or heart when trapped in the urban sprawl, deprived of the freedom and boundless possibilities found within nature. Those feelings of bliss and beauty no square of concrete can provide. I'm not anti-industry by any means, and neither is Hayao, but by no means am I on board with the backtracking several countries like America are facing when it comes to protecting this world and its future. We as humans, born from nature itself, have a solemn duty to protect it. Industry provides us with so many things that are vital to our progression as a species. It's no short to say it's a necessity for our kind. But that doesn't mean we should forsake nature, to die out as we suck it dry of its resources. There's 2 sides to this conversation. Irontown, led by Eboshi, worried for her people's future, and with providing them medicine and homes. Blinded by her purpose to provide for her people, she neglects and oftentimes undermines nature itself, the very thing that gives her metal to mine and herbs to collect. The spirits and animals of the forest, here before the beginnings of the industry, are forced to fight for survival. Diplomacy not an option with those of Irontown, and a cycle of hate is born from the following violence. The resolution to this predicament we find ourselves in, our reliance on industry and our compassion for the earth and nature, is to find a middle ground. Understand both sides of the argument and work towards a future where we can both progress society in its pieces, while also protecting that which is natural. Japan has been renowned since the 70s for its balance of industrial pursuits and protection of the environment. Hayao's message of coexistence of these 2 worlds is a vital message. One, if anything, needs to reach the ears of other nations more than his own. However, it's important to keep a message alive even in the best of times. Before the 70s, seeing it with his own eyes as Japan rebuilt, the country faced heavy pollution issues and oil shock until finally finding a resolution that balanced these opposing pursuits. His story will continue to share the importance of open thought as we continue to struggle to this day for proper environmental protection. There is extreme value in our actions. Each decision you make can have a large impact on the world around you, the people around you, and of course yourself. To understand humanism is vital to understanding Miyazaki, a philosophy that puts extreme importance on our actions, focusing on the development of reasoning, ethics, and judgment in the pursuit of development. Obeying an order, whether religious or governmental, without questioning its laws and rules, would be contrary to the principles humanism outlines, an ideology Miyazaki likely adopted from his mother's teaching. A humanistic approach allows one to place purpose not in blind faith to various power structures, but find such a thing within their actions, both for their own merit and society's. No matter what path you choose to walk, you can choose to live an ethical and meaningful life, forged by yourself, not at the discretion of another. He shared these ideals through Spirited Away, having Chiro go through a journey of self-improvement, from a whiny, selfish girl to one that is strong, independent, and most of all, empathetic. His mother had honed him to be an understanding individual, and his mother oftentimes comes out in his characters. Miyazaki loves creating strong-willed female characters, a great contribution to Japan's society as it still works to improve gender stereotypes. Chi's journey through the spirit world shows the need to understand others, and then to aid to people struggling to find themselves. Her actions, even those that appear small and insurmountable, lead to development both for her and others. Those that seemed lost to greed and corruption find hope and transformation, become better people through personal choices, not reliance on a preacher or official to tell them right from wrong. We have a heart for that very purpose. People choose whether they want to be good or bad. We control our own journeys. In life, there will be things that happen to you, some good, some bad, but it's up to you to decide how those events will shape you. Will you retreat into nihilism, selfishness, and look at the world around you as bleak and unredeemable? Or will you choose hope, believe in redemption, and love and empathy? It can be hard to look for the good in the world, bask in the wonder and endless possibilities, especially when faced with extreme suffering and pain. But maybe that's what makes it all worthwhile, despite the insurmountable difficulties Miyazaki has faced. Whether it be war, death, or purposelessness, he always found a way to look for hope of a better tomorrow, a hope that we as humans can learn to understand one another and grow as people, become harmonious in understanding of our differences. America isn't short on films and media that glorifies the very idea of violence. Maybe it's our nature that such a thing is so captivating. Maybe it's that sense of wonder as to why these things happen, or the adrenaline in these scenarios, even when just on a screen, can pump through us. We as a country hold a lot of bewilderment to the violence, and oftentimes we Americans are exposed to it in our daily lives. Shootings occur more often than days in a year. Obviously, depending where you live in this rather large country, it may be less or more present in your life than I'm implying. But the fact of the matter is, as a collective, we are obsessed with violence. It may be his experience in the destruction of war, having seen the bombs drop and the fires rage, the families torn apart and the buildings left in shambles, that Hayao has expressed his annoyance and frustration with America's portrayal of violence in films as a solution to problems. And I have to say, this perception opened my own eyes. Miyazaki's used violence in his films to express the horrors it brings. Howl's moving castle shows the sheer chaos and senseless death of civilians, the greed and lust for power and control behind the deaths of young men killing one another over ambiguous ideas. War isn't a problem solver, it simply creates more problems. Why, as people, as human beings, are we driven to use killings as a way to solve our differences, exterminating the opposition until they agree to bow their heads? It's hard to comprehend, yet at this point it feels bleak and as if there's no way out. It follows us everywhere. It's implanted into our heads. A sense of hate we feel for people we believed wronged us or believed something contrary to us. Violence has become a tool to solve arguments. It has been a tool in nature itself since its creations. Apes battle each other over food, land, shelter, reproduction. And we as humans fight over ideologies, resources, and currency. Yet after the blood has been spilt, all that remains are a pile of bodies for both sides. American media has used violence to comment on our society just as well as Miyazaki. Platoon is a great example of a movie carrying a heavy message regarding the young men forced into the Vietnam War. But for every comment on the horrors of war is a John Wayne Green Beret film vilifying any opposition to the American way, of using violence instead of diplomacy to fight for the ideas of capitalism. Miyazaki's belief of pacifism might be scrutinized by those believing to protect oneself means to attack. But to that I say, has any of these prevented invasion wars occurring over the past 75 years? been anything more than costly in lives and resources. We fight for the ideals we're told we're defending, protecting our way of life, yet nothing ever changes besides the population count of the world. But maybe that's just my point of view. Hayao believes power and strength should be used to promote diplomacy that can lead to understanding of one's opposition. He shows through Howl's decision to intervene in the war, using his strength to put an end to the mindless violence, that he's not inadvertently against using brute force as a defense resort. That may be seen as a contradiction to the idea of pacifism, but as with every ideology, there are times when it must bode. It's clear Hayao's belief is violence is not a tool to overcome obstacles, to achieve justice, or become a hero. It's an act that brings irreversible destruction and loss. It can be easy to become desensitized to until you see it and feel the consequences firsthand. The idea of the future often finds itself glorified as a utopia, though that optimism has waned over recent years. It used to be when people pictured the future, it was caked with ideas of technological advancements. Flying cars, robots taking care of laborers' jobs, humans able to focus on emotionally fulfilling work. Yet as time progressed, the technology we were promised would make our lives better became misused, weaponized to spread fear and attain power. Technology and its advancements are not inherently bad, but as shown by Castle in the Sky, Miyazaki believes it vital that these advancements fall under the consideration of ethics. Not all progress is good progress. What once seemed innovative can turn into a source of destruction. When we learned to harness nuclear fission, it was clear it could be used as a new source of energy, providing millions a less polluted way to power cities. Yet its first use was that of a bomb to evaporate hundreds of thousands of lives. And to this day, there is resistance to adopt fission as a viable source of energy by fossil fuel lobbyists, in the very country that discovered the ability to harness nuclear energy in the first place. Innovation follows the pace of the power-hungry. It can be used against us in the wrong hands, bring destruction or prosperity. There is nearly always some kind of aversion to advancements, fear of what it might create, fear that it might harm us, our jobs, our lifestyle, our wealth. As represented here, Miyazaki believes it's our responsibility to speak out against and hold those who lead these advancements responsible in consideration to ethics. Tech is a blessing and a curse. It's our duty to ensure we safely advance as a civilization and nip the buds of greed and lust before they destroy what has already been built. Once again, we find ourselves with polarizing viewpoints, held in consideration at the heart of this story. Two mindsets butting heads, with neither overcoming the other, but rather through the intervention of characters representing the humanistic ideals. The understanding of both sides of the argument, a middle ground is reached that recognizes both the gift of technology and the responsibility of restraint. It may seem contradicting to some, seen as refusal to pick a side, but maybe that just means you should learn to think outside your own narrow point of view. Life isn't a battle between good ideals and bad. It's ambiguous. There isn't one answer to it, such as a Miyazaki story. Coming to terms with that is a hard thing to do, and even a man in his 80s struggles with such a thing. His stories speak of the contradictions in his ideas. Nature is of high importance, yet so is industry. Technological advancements should be welcomed, but their consequences should be considered just the same. We as humans are flawed and capable of creating pain, yet we also hold the ability to lead moral lives, learning from our mistakes and becoming better for it. It can be rattling, balancing these tug-of-war battles that happen within you each time you make a decision, or watch as the world around you rejects one side for the other instead of considering both ends. It can turn a man cynical. Yet despite the futility Miyazaki sometimes feels towards humans and their effects on the world, he holds hope good will persevere, and humanity will acknowledge their mistakes and build a better tomorrow. His deep reflection on humanity's state is seen throughout all his work, likely a large contributor to his workaholism and inability to hang up his director hat. His perfectionism in his work and desire to share these stories with the future generations, to inspire them to take on these challenges we face globally, can be seen in his efforts to share his thoughts. It can be hard to watch the man exhaust himself, become fully immersed in each of his projects as if it's life and limb on the line each and every time. But it's that passion and desire to continue that makes each film so otherworldly. What we see on the screen is the fruits of a man's life, of his expression to the world of what he's experienced, both in pain and in love. He's seen the destruction we create and chose to still create despite the worry that one day it will amount to nothing. He shares worlds unimaginable with audiences far and wide. Maybe it's a coping mechanism, each project lifting part of the unease he feels for our future, believing each film is helping others recognize the wasteful nature of prejudice, hate, and distrust. Maybe hanging up his hat would mean admitting he no longer has anything to share. As he said himself, "I'll refuse to stop creating until my body no longer has the strength to do so." So for the sake of his purpose, the legacy he'll leave on this world, Miyazaki will keep drawing these stories. He's been conscious of morality his entire life. For a man who was once told he'd die at 20, he's exceeded that mark by 65 years. But what he may be most afraid of isn't the end of his own life, but of his work. He knows one day Studio Ghibli will cease to exist, and he's come to terms with that. As he said, it's just a studio, but we know it means more than that to him. It holds deep meaning. It's a second home. Why else would he struggle to step away? He loves what he does and loves to continue to do it despite the pressure and stress the job brings. Miyazaki's an artist first and foremost, but he's also a deeply thoughtful man, one who wishes to share a message with the world, to pursue understanding over hate, and learn to live harmoniously in consideration of the world around us, bringing to it new possibilities without rejecting the old world. We are more alike than different, despite what you may be told. And together we will rise to new heights, unimaginable alone. Yet divided by war, inequality, and hate, we will fail before we can begin. Listen to Miyazaki and choose to live life with both eyes open.